Welcome back to Half the Battle. I'm your host, as always, Daniel Levy, your guest co-host, Luke Lampe. Today, we're going to be talking about UFC Vegas 61, Mackenzie Dern versus Yan Xiaonan, because it's going down this Saturday night live at the Apex in Las Vegas, Nevada. Private viewing, Luke. I heard my boy Mark Zuckerberg rented out the Apex to him and his closest friends. No media going to be there, but man, what a hell of a main event. You got the world championship black belt Mackenzie Dern taking on one of the best strikers in the division, Yan Xiaonan. A lot of people have been complaining about this main event, but I'm looking forward to it, Luke. How's it going?
Pretty good, man. Yeah, looking forward to chopping this card up with you. I know we got another break week after this, which kind of sucks, and then we kind of take this all the way into the back part of the year. But yeah, it should be a fun card, man.
Absolutely is. And listen, I know a lot of people have been crying about this, but I'm not one of those people, and I'll tell you why. And I'm not just trying to sit here and be different and, this and that for the sake of doing it. The reality is that, like, the kind of main events I cry about are, like, Holly Holm main events. Like, you remember, like, when Holly Holm fought Vieira in the co-main event was Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Michelle Pereira. On this show, I literally treated it as if Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Michelle Pereira was the main event, because between you and me, that was the main event. And then the Holm Vieira fight ended up being one of the worst fights of the year. This fight between Xiaonan and Dern is not going to suck. Like, for y'all watching this that just want to be entertained, I'm telling you, this fight is not going to suck. If it hits the mat, you already know what Mackenzie Dern brings to the table. And on the feet, Yan Xiaonan is one of the meanest chicks in the division. So let's break this fight down, because in the main event, in the strawweight division, we got Mackenzie Dern. She's 12-2, taking on Yan Xiaonan, who is 15-3. And currently, we're going to be reading off Draftkings odds, because they sponsored today's episode. Shout out to Draftkings. They got it -225. Mackenzie Dern, the comeback on Yan Xiaonan at +190. So, Luke, it's an interesting fight. I mean, on paper, it's kind of black and white. We think if it hits the mat, it favors Mackenzie. On the feet, it favors Yan Xiaonan. Is it that black and white, or is there something more we need to be looking into here?
I guess I kind of fall more into the black and white crowd personally. Obviously, the questions with Dern always kind of come with her wrestling still hasn't really translated. I think only landing like her takedowns at like 9% or so. One thing I do think with Dern, though, I do think her stand-up has improved, and I was actually kind of impressed with her performance against Torres, standing at least. I thought she did a lot. I thought she showed a lot better things. I think she outlanded her on head strikes like 42-19. She's always kind of been consistent to come forward, but I think she has tightened things up a bit in recent years. At the same time, I do still think it's kind of a quasi-levels fight on the feet. I think Yan's proven to be pretty technical, keep a solid work rate, decent footwork. I mean, we saw her go out there and give Marina Rodriguez one hell of a scrap on the feet, who in my opinion is one of the best technical strikers in the division. I don't think many people would disagree. So if that doesn't tell you what, the caliber of striker that Yan Xiaonan is, I don't know what does. So it's one of those spots, man. You got 25 minutes. Can Dern get the takedown? Yan has shown some hittable tendencies in the pocket. So, I don't necessarily think it's like a complete wash for Yan on the feet, but I would have to moderately favor her, on just general pacing and technical acumen. And the problem I have here with Yan is obviously the Esparza fight. We know Esparza is one of the best wrestlers in the division, no doubt about it. But historically, Esparza has been more of your kind of like lay in the guard, lay and pray, pepper shot type of girl, rack up control time minutes. But she just emasculated homegirl Yan on the ground. She was able to pass her guard pretty easily, and get the job done. And obviously, I heavily favor Dern on the ground, but I heavily value what Dern is able to do on the ground. And she's also one of those girls who doesn't always necessarily need takedowns, right? She can jump on girls' backs in the clinch. She can pull guard. She can force leg lock transitions. So it's not necessarily she has to score a conventional takedown to get this fight in the grappling. And just what I've seen from Yan, at least historically, it hasn't been pretty, outside of this sports fight. We saw Angela Hill stick her in that triangle. Probably honestly might have finished her if there's a few more seconds left on the end of that round. So yeah, I am kind of with the general crowd that it's probably one takedown might be this fight, but who knows? I mean, Yan could have leveled up, gotten a lot better in that capacity. But yeah, it's just always really interesting and difficult to cap Mackenzie Dern fights.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I mean, I'm just curious if it really is a one takedown situation, because I kind of thought the Dern Rodriguez fight was a one takedown situation. She even took her down in that fight. I think she even passed a full mount, and Rodriguez was able to survive that round. Next round starts on the feet and was able to stuff the subsequent takedown attempts. So hopefully for Yan's sake, if, worst case scenarios happen, she can survive in those spots. And if she can, the next round always starts on the feet. And the aforementioned Yan versus Rodriguez, I think that's the best bet I've made this year that hasn't cashed. Like, I bet Yan, I think plus 275, plus 265, something around there, maybe plus 250. I don't remember off the top of my head, but
I bet her too.
I'd make that bet 10 times out of 10, like a close split decision that could go either way. And you're getting like plus 275 odds. So I was actually really happy with that bet. Obviously, I would have loved to get, Yan's arm raised, but it is what it is. I'll keep making bets like that. Here, it just comes down to, are you willing to roll the dice on Yan, knowing, what could potentially happen if this hits the mat? I think I am. Obviously the Esparza fight is a concern, but we've seen other fights where she's been in there with black belts. She's gotten taken down. The first round against Claudia Gadelha, she was able to survive, and then the next two rounds was able to stuff the takedowns. So we've seen, other spots where Claudia Gadelha, I'd say that she's also a black belt in jiu-jitsu just like Dern, but maybe the wrestling isn't quite there like Esparza, similar to Dern. But like you mentioned, the Tisha Torres fight, I was in attendance. That was in Florida. She's got some slick ways to take the back. And to her credit, she's been leveling up on the feet too. She's been working with Jason Perillo, who's been, improving the boxing, not just Mackenzie Dern, but also Marlon Chito Vera, responsible for UFC champions like BJ Penn and Michael Bisping. So, I definitely expect Dern to be getting better. I just don't think that she's going to be catching up to Yan Xiaonan on the feet. And likewise, I don't think that Yan Xiaonan is going to be catching up to Matt, to the jiu-jitsu acumen of someone like Mackenzie Dern. But to give Mackenzie Dern some credit on the feet, even though it doesn't look the prettiest, she's got some pop. For a straw weight, I've seen her drop people before. She definitely hits pretty hard for that weight class's standard, and she's definitely going to be tightening things up. So it just depends on what happens here in the mat. I think I'm willing to roll the dice, put one unit on Yan Xiaonan, and if it hits the mat, hopefully she can survive to see the next round and not get submitted. But I'm not an idiot, and I know that the submission is live here for Mackenzie Dern. But I think that Yan Xiaonan is going to be winning the minutes on the feet here, and hopefully don't even let it hit the mat. But if it does survive, get me to the next round and win that round, I'm going to go with Yan Xiaonan for this upset.
Yeah, dude, I think she's the side as well, at least at the price. I think I'd feel better about taking a shot if it was 3 rounds and not 5 rounds, but I do think she's the side at the price.
Yeah, look, there's obvious concerns, no doubt about it. So we'll just have to see how this one plays out. But co-main event of the evening in the welterweight division, we got Randy Rude Boy Brown. He's 15-4, taking on Francisco Masuranduba Trinaldo, who's 28-8. And currently at DraftKings Sportsbook, they got it Randy Brown minus 305. Luke, the comeback on Francisco Masuranduba is plus 255. So, if this was a pick 'em, I'd be all over Randy Brown here. But Randy Brown, I think he's extremely talented. I think he's long. I think he's a guy that every single time you see these big improvements. But, to cover minus 305, there can't be any moments for Trinaldo, and Trinaldo seems to have a hell of a lot of moments, man. It's funny because he's like what, 45 years old?
44, I think.
And he's won 4 of his last 5. So it's like this guy's like an ageless wonder. He's like a fine wine. He gets better with time. If someone said my audio was a little shaky, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it kind of like pops a little bit. Like you can hear largely what you're saying, but just like kind of like the mic makes like a popping sound every once in a while. But yeah.
Okay. Well, sorry about that, guys. I had like a whole thing going this whole week, but hopefully y'all can get the gist of what I'm saying. That's my hope. But let me know in the comments if y'all can hear what I'm saying. All right. If not, I'm gonna have to switch my laptop. It will be shittier camera quality, but maybe you'll be able to hear everything I'm saying. But anyways. Randy Brown, obviously super talented, finally turning into the guy that we once hoped he'd be, because I thought this guy was someone to look out for since day one. He's finally putting it all together. But last fight against Chaos Williams, I bet him at like plus 115. Definitely didn't cover no minus 305 in that fight, but that's, against a younger, fresher guy. What do you think here, man? You think he's going to look minus 300 in the spot?
Yeah, you kind of brought up an interesting point. Trinaldo 4-1 in his last 5, and I was kind of just running back through the timestamps. Something I talk about and a lot of people talk about all the time too is, once those fighters hit 40 years old, it's kind of the point of no return for usually most guys, or there's this clear downward trajectory. It's not the case for Trinaldo. Actually, since turning 40 years old, he's 6-2 in the UFC. And you could make an argument 7-1 with that Alexander Hernandez fight, which was essentially 50-50. You could have easily given that fight to Trinaldo too. So there's a very real scenario where homeboy is 7-1 at 40 plus years old at the UFC level, fighting solid competition. And that's the thing with Trinaldo, man. I think people are kind of glossing over that a little bit, as if Trinaldo falls into that like category of just, a guy who's just looking terrible in his 40s or on this big losing streak or losing to bums. It's like Trinaldo like defies that. He's kind of in a category of his own in that, right? So I think people need to pump the brakes on that narrative, because it's just categorically not true and unfounded. You brought up another good point as well with Trinaldo, is that dude will sling big body kicks. He'll sling big overhands. We obviously saw him have Jai Herbert or hurt him significantly in that fight. And he has this way to kind of like lull his way into like closer fights. Even early on in the Salikov fight, he looked really good, in my opinion. It was just kind of when he got dropped at the end of the first that the tide started to change a little bit. But in general, Trinaldo usually isn't getting, blown out of the water minute to minute by anybody. And so going back to your point of Randy Brown being minus 300, in my opinion, for him to cover a minus 300 price tag, you'd have to think he finishes Trinaldo at a decent size clip, which is possible, right? We have seen Trinaldo get dropped, I think, in 2 of his last 4 fights. So, the durability might be going a little bit there. So there is some merit to that, but I'm just not sold, man. And there's still some wishy-washy tendencies with Randy Brown at the same time too, right? Like, he's not necessarily the most consistent minute-to-minute fighter. He's been hurt multiple times. We know he can get taken down and play from his back at times as well. Like, the best way I could classify Randy Brown is the type of guy you want to back as an undervalued dog. I was right on him with you against Cass Williams at like 116. I played as well, and I think the ROI numbers show that as well. Randy Brown returns at 61% as a dog and only 14% as a favorite. So to lay minus 300, you'd have to think he's at least 80% in this fight. And it's even at 44. How many guys are really 80% over a guy like Francisco Trinaldo? Like that's my thing. But I understand he is 44 years old. The carpet kind of drops off from all these guys at some point. But X's and O's wise and how Trinaldo has still been performing at this age, I'm very close to taking the big dog shot on Trinaldo. I think people are going to continue to parlay Randy Brown. And I like I said, I only think he covers that price tag if you think he finishes Trinaldo at a high clip. And I'm not sold. But Randy Brown, obviously bigger, more youthful, 3-fight winning streak in the better part of his career. Trinaldo, historic 155, up at 170. He is going to, have somewhat of a tall task here. I think the line's wide at the end of the day.
It is wide. Trinaldo is one of those guys, obviously, that big left hand has dropped many people throughout his UFC career, can mix in those opportune takedowns, has been the distance many, many times. The guy's had, 20 UFC fights or around there. But at the end of the day, just on a pure pick level, 12-year age gap, set 8-inch reach advantage, the volume edge. For those reasons, I do have to go with Randy Brown. It's just, again, I'm not crazy about, minus 300, minus 305. Randy Brown's a guy I like to either bet as an underdog or if I'm going to bet him as a favorite. In the past, it was against guys like Mickey Gall, right? The last fight against Chaos was plus 115. Minus 300 should be reserved for mismatches. And I'm not sitting here saying that he's not going to come out here and finish Trinaldo, because he very might well, Trinaldo has been finished before. Randy Brown is getting better. It's just before the fact, it's tough to predict that as an outcome, for me at least. I know some of y'all are very confident in Randy Brown parlaying him. So if he comes out here and he does his thing, it won't shock me at all. But it also won't shock me if this is a competitive 3-round fight. So the pick is Randy Brown. I'm just before the fact, I'm not sure about this price tag. Now, Next up, we got the featured bout in the bantamweight division. We got Raoni Barcelos. He's 16-3, taking on Trevin Jones, who is 13-8. Currently on DraftKings Sportsbook, they got it. Raoni Barcelos minus 225. The comeback on Trevin Jones is plus 190. So this is my first bet of the night. I took Raoni Barcelos about a week ago at minus 196. So I understand the concerns. You know, he might possibly be on the decline. He's getting up there in age, this and that, which I think are fair things to say. However, I don't think that last fight he had against Victor Henry is really much of a concern here in this fight. Reason being is this dude, Victor Henry, threw 397 strikes, Luke. That's one thing that I know Trevin Jones isn't out here doing. Trevin Jones is one of these guys that kind of reminds me of Woodley a little bit, backs himself into the fence, lands that one big strike, and he's got knockout power for sure. And I think his path to victory here is a knockout, and if he gets that knockout, all props to him. But I think just on volume alone, I think that Raoni Barcelos is going to be winning the minutes of this fight, and I always love the volume angle. If you can double, triple up your opponent on output, I just love taking guys like that, and I love betting on guys like that. So I'm going to be betting on Raoni Barcelos here, hoping he doesn't get knocked out, because if he doesn't get knocked out, I think he's winning this fight.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I took Raoni at minus 200 as well, and I think we're kind of getting a bit of a buy low spot on Raoni. You know, I know it's chalky, you know, on paper at minus 200, but usually, you know, you're having to pay, you know, 300, 400, 500, 600 for a guy like Barcelos. And I thought you broke down the fight well and kind of hit on my main point of really just the volume. I mean, the volume difference is massive. Jones is kind of more of your tepid outside type of guy who kind of needs to find the big shot. You know, we know that Raoni's consistent to come forward, let his hands go, dictate the pace of his fights. And I just think that's a pretty bad stylistic matchup for Jones in that capacity. Yeah, Jones, you know, has shown some pop. He can potentially knock out Barcelos. Barcelos has gotten, you know, wobbled a little bit in recent years, but historically, you know, he has been durable, which needs to be noted. And obviously you have those kind of two shining moments for Jones with the knockout over Valiev and Bautista, where, you know, on the rap sheet, really excellent W's, but he was technically losing both of those fights prior to finding the kill shot. Even if you go back further on in his career, he hasn't been a perennial knockout artist prior to those fights. So how much actual power he has, I'm not like 100% willing to say he's like this big, massive pure power threat, because it's not like he has like a 90% knockout rate or anything like that. And then I think Barcelos has clear wrestling and grappling advantages in this fight too. You know, he doesn't always go to it, but obviously an established black belt, I think with his, you know, general belt lineage dating back to like Carlos Gracie or something like that. He was a Brazilian state national wrestling champion. Pretty much nobody's had any sort of, you know, grappling or wrestling success against Barcelos in the past. So I don't really see that as being a path for Jones. I kind of think he's KO or bust in this spot.
Next up in the featherweight division, we got a match between Sodiq Yusuff. He's 12-2, taking on Yan Xiaonan, who is 12-3. Currently, they got it. Sodiq Yusuff minus 900. The comeback on Yan Xiaonan is plus 625. So I respect Yan Xiaonan. You know, I like him. He's a guy who actually fought my buddy Nate Williams. Nate Williams beat him in a 5-round fight. It was a good back and forth fight. And I think that Yan Xiaonan is definitely ready for this UFC opportunity. It's just, you know, jump into the top 15 on your first fight. You know, I'm not so sure about his chances, but I also think the line reflects that. You know, I don't think that there's much value on Sodiq at minus 900. Unfortunately, because I love betting on Sodiq Yusuff, but I love betting on him at bettable lines. And this is an unbettable line. So if you know something about Shainis, which I do, but I'm personally, you know, not convinced that he wins this fight. But if you think he's going to get the upset, you know, throw a half unit on him. But I just don't think so, man. I think that Sodiq Yusuff has too much firepower. And not to mention, like, this guy comes from a jiu-jitsu gym. Like, let's not forget, like, this guy's jiu-jitsu lineage. So I think that if it hits the mat, he's got a big advantage there as well. I think that he probably plays it safe here, gets it done. The question is it going to be a finish or a decision? I'm not sure. But Sodiq gets it done, and then I think he moves on to some bigger, better things. And Yan Xiaonan will be back.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. We've seen spots like this pretty much over and over again. Shainis coming in on 2 weeks' notice. I don't think he's bad or anything. I mean, he's shown some power on the feet. He's shown some wrestling upside in the past too. I think he can probably get some wins at the UFC level, but I just my general assumption of him as I don't necessarily think he has much longevity in the UFC, and he's probably always going to be like a just a really high level regional fighter, which is completely fine. To your point, it's just such a big step up in competition on short notice against a battle tested dude who's just much more physical, much more athletic, hits much harder. Um, Obviously fought the better brand of competition, so tough ask. I also just don't think Shainis has the cardio, at least in this spot, to sustain the game plan he's going to try to go to. So I think Sodiq finds his chin along the way.
Now, next up, we have an 140-pound catchweight bout between John Castaneda, he's 9-5, taking on Daniel Willie Catch Santos, who is 9-2. And currently they got it. John Castaneda minus 195. The comeback on Daniel Santos is plus 165. So I got a bet on this one as well, man. So I took 1 unit on John Castaneda, 1 unit on Daniel Santos at plus 175. And a lot of people are like, what the hell are you thinking? Because they're so impressed by that Castaneda versus Miles Johns fight, which I understand. It was a very impressive fight. But what you got to understand is that Miles Johns is another one of these guys, kind of like Trevin Jones, that doesn't throw anything at all, has no gas tank, is more of an athlete than a guy that's going to bite down on that mouthpiece and be there the entire time. And I think Daniel Santos is going to be there the entire time. I think Daniel Santos is going to get right in John Castaneda's face. I think he's going to make him fight. And I think they're going to have an honest 3-round scrap. So with that being said, you give me an honest 3-round scrap, and I like the plus 175 odds on Daniel Santos. I like John Castaneda. Don't get me wrong. I don't think he's bad by any means, and I think that he has been looking more impressive every single fight. I just think you got to put some context into it, man. The Eddie Wineland fight, I thought he was getting touched up the entire time until he finally clipped Eddie Wineland on Eddie Wineland's retirement fight. This is Eddie Wineland coming off the Sean O'Malley knockout, which was uncomfortable to watch. And that Eddie Wineland was touching up Castaneda. Next fight against Miles Johns. Miles Johns has no volume, and Miles Johns is not the toughest guy. Miles Johns is a great athlete, but when the going gets tough, Miles Johns does not bite down on that mouthpiece. Daniel Santos will bite down on that mouthpiece. Not to mention, Daniel Santos' last fight against Julija Arce was his first fight since 2019. Now that he's got his feet under him a little bit, he's got his feet wet inside the octagon. I think we can expect a better performance this time. And he threw a lot in that fight against Julija Arce. He just happened to miss a lot of those shots. I think that Julija Arce is a lot slicker on the defensive side than John Castaneda is. I think John Castaneda will give one and take one, which is a quality we love as fans. But if I'm laying 2-1 on someone, I don't want it to be that close. I think it will be that close. So give me the plus 175 on Daniel Santos here, and I hope he comes out here and edges this one out.
Yeah, we're going to agree on this one as well. I think you pretty much hit on all my main points, so I don't want to rehash everything. But yeah, that's kind of the thing with Santos. I think he's still a bit of a wild card. I think he's getting a little disrespected based on the Arce fight. I mean, Arce is like a fringe top 15 guy and a pretty strong defensive striker. I know he recently got knocked out by Song. But in general, pretty sound defensively. And we also saw Arce push a much higher pace in that fight than he has pretty much historically ever, which needs to be noted too. So it's just a tough ask for Daniel Santos in his debut. And yeah, that's the thing with Castaneda. Like you said, the Wineland fight I thought was incredibly competitive prior to the knockout. The Jones fight I thought was also, the Johns fight I thought was pretty competitive through the first 6 minutes. And then John's pretty much just his cardio dumped and Castaneda was able to take over. But that's the one thing that's consistent with Santos is this dude's gas tank's good. You go back and watch some of his fights in Russia where, he's fighting all these Sambo guys who are just relentlessly trying to wrestle him and take him down and stuff. Dude's not huffing and puffing at all. Like he's completely fine under like a really taxing, up down type of style. And he's even been able to, get on top of some of these guys, threaten some of these ninja chokes. And that's the thing, like he can be taken down, but he's really difficult to hold down. Like he does a really good job of basing, framing, shrimping. I think he's like a 4-stripe purple belt now. So, not anything crazy, but obviously one of the main training partners of Charles Oliveira out at that shoot box camp in Brazil. And obviously I think the UFC thinks something of this guy, right? He was pinned to make his original debut, I think, against Timur Valiev as well, who's not an easy, not a cupcake of a debut, right? So yeah, and to your point, he's only fought once in the last 3 years. So, there is a little bit of guessing game here, but I just think it's interesting that Castaneda was like a plus 170-ish dog or whatever to Miles Johns. Now he's a minus 200 favorite. It just seems like kind of a recency bias, market overcorrection sentiment spot where I think we can get a nice little buy low spot on this Santos kid. No supreme degree of confidence, but I just think the fight should be aligned a lot more competitively.
On that topic of him being a 4-stripe purple belt, I saw some clips of him rolling with Alan Nascimento, who's a slick-ass grappler, and Daniel Santos submitted him. So, I mean, let's just say that I wouldn't sleep on his ground game either, but I expect the fight to primarily take place standing. Now, kicking off the main card, we got a lightweight matchup between Mike Davis, he's 9-2, taking on Vyacheslav Barshov, who is 6-2. And currently at DraftKings Sportsbook, we got it Mike Davis minus 175. The comeback on Vyacheslav Barshov is plus 150. So, Luke, what do you think, man? I mean, I think we both agree that Mike Davis is probably the more athletic guy, the more physically gifted. Definitely has an advantage wrestling-wise. Striking is where it's going to be interesting. How you see it going down?
Yeah, dude, I think this is probably one of the most intriguing matchups on the card. I love both guys. I'm a fan of both guys. They're both very fun to watch. My questions with Davis are primarily twofold, kind of just like where he's at right now, just because he's been so inactive. I think he's only had one fight in the last 3 years. And I was listening to a couple other podcasts this week with my buddy Narco Cop saying that he had Davis on his spaces a while back and, was asking about like, what's the deal with the inactivity? And he said he's just been battling all these health issues over the last 3 or so years. I'm not sure what it is specifically, but I just think that's something interesting to note why he necessarily hasn't been in the cage. I think he did suffer a big knee injury in there to boot, but that's kind of hesitation number one with Davis. But then stylistically, Davis does come from a wrestling background. He is a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. He has mixed takedowns into his fights, but he's not really the guy to go out there and dive on legs for 15 minutes or, just rack up extensive amounts of control time, go out there and take the back and submit a ton of guys. He has on a few occasions, but in general, he's primarily a boxer, right? And we know the kind of the blueprint out on how to either take minutes, rounds, or fights off of Slava, and that's to go to the wrestling and get after the K1 kickboxer who just moved over to MMA in the last 4 years. We saw D1 Jacasey in that last fight for sure. It's just I don't know if we have enough of that from Davis to sit there and say he's going to go out there and accrue 12 and a half minutes of control time on Borja. He might be able to. But like I said, my question is that even his game plan to come out here and aggressively wrestle? I'm not sold. If he does, can he duplicate that? I'm not necessarily sure. Nonetheless, I think it's a path for him on the feet. It's boxer versus kickboxer. I think Davis, you'd have to favor in tight. You'd have to favor Borchev at range. We've seen Davis struggle with some of the kicking components, especially to the calf in the past, which I think is a nice little feather in the cap of Borchev. Obviously, both guys very powerful, very dangerous, consistent work rates. But I would say Davis is probably the more durable party at this point, at least in terms of the firefights where we have seen that be a little bit of a chink for Borchev, despite not getting officially knocked out. We have seen him drop before. We have seen him hurt before. So I would lean Davis on the durability. So, but in general, man, I do think it's probably a competitive scrap. I lean to the Davis side, but from a betting perspective, I could probably only go one way on the dog in Borchev.
Yeah, I mean, I lean Davis as well. My issue is that Davis likes to go to war with every single person he fights. He's the kind of guy that wants to beat you at your own game. So even though there's that, more likely path to victory, which is go there and wrestle against Slava, Davis is the kind of guy that wants to prove a point. He wants to draw that line in the sand. He wants to say that I beat the K1 kickboxer in a striking match. Like, that's just the kind of guy he is. He'll mix in some takedowns along the way. But he's not a guy that's going to come out here and stall. He's going to try to fight you, which as a fan love. It's just when we're laying minus 175, when we're laying minus 200, I need some, I need some insurance here. I need to know for a fact that you're going to do, take that path of least resistance. And I just don't know if he's going to do that. Now, with that said, that doesn't mean he can't win this fight on the feet. I think that Davis is extremely talented. I think that he's also like a supreme athlete, man. I think that he's a real talented physical specimen that can get away with certain things because of his athleticism, but technically speaking, he's up there too. And you mix those two things together and he's a problem. Now it's just about, getting in there consistently, getting those rounds in. Because like you said, he only fights like once every couple of years. So on one hand, you might see a much more improved version of Davis. On the other hand, it might be kind of a wild card. So I'm not quite sure, but I do lean Davis. I mean, if we're getting the best version of both guys, I think Davis might even make it look easy. But based on Davis's history, it's probably going to be a war. But give me Davis regardless. So before I talk about Jessica Penne versus Tabatha Ricci, I want to give a big shout out to DraftKings Sportsbook, who are sponsoring today's episode of the podcast. Everybody do me a huge favor, smash the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. So thank you, DraftKings, for sponsoring today's episode of the podcast. So guys, the NFL action is in full swing at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. We're talking touchdowns, big plays, and even bigger wins. New customers can bet just $5 on any NFL team to win and get $200 in free bets if they do. Check this out. In addition to the usual bets, everyone can boost their winnings with DraftKings stepped up same game parlays. So, for example, I like my Falcons. I know that the Falcons may not be the best this year, but you know how I run. You know how I roll. It's ATL teams all day, but y'all got to roll with your team. And even for the UFC fight with the same game parlays, you can do Mackenzie Dern and Mackenzie Dern by submission if that's what you're feeling, right? So to make things even sweeter, you could throw down on stepped up same game parlays once per game day all season long. So guys, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use promo code Levy. That's my last name, spelled just like Levi Jeans, to get $200 in free bets if your team wins when you place a $5 bet on any football game. That's code Levy, only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. All right. Now, Luke, let's talk about this matchup in the strawweight division between Jessica Penne, she's 14-6, taking on the baby shark Tabatha Ricci, 7-1. And currently at DraftKings Sportsbook, they got it minus 210 for Tabatha Ricci. The comeback on Jessica Penne is plus 180. So, listen, I know that Jessica Penne, it's interesting because I was writing her off when she made her UFC return. Like, you remember how she popped for that drug test or whatever. She changed her biological passport, whatever the fuck that means. Doesn't sound very good. And prior to that, she had taken a ton of damage against Joanna, against Jessica Andrade. She comes back and she wins against Lupe Godinez, which even if you scored it for Lupe, the fact that it was even competitive, was at least a step in the right direction for Jessica. And then the next fight against Carolina, she definitely impressed, but she kind of showed her age a bit in that Emily Ducote fight. And her opponent here, Ricci, I got to give her credit. She's a tough chick, man. I mean, in that Fioro fight, she definitely took the whooping, but she took it admirably. I don't think that she showed any quit. And since that point, I think that she's definitely on the greener side, but I think she's showing a couple things here and there that she can build upon. She's got the jiu-jitsu background. She's in very, very good shape. Now she's got, a couple fights under her belt. She's starting to feel more comfortable out there. So does she come out here and cover this price tag is the big question.
Well, I got my Ricci merch on. I'm a Ricci truther. I've been a Ricci truther for a while. I've watched all of her stuff in LFA. Was happy to eventually see her get the call. To your point, obviously makes her debut, gets butchered by Fioro up a weight class. Showed a lot of toughness and heart in that fight, though. It was standing TKO. It's not like she got put out cold and fight lasted 8 minutes. But yeah, to your point, I do think she is still reasonably green. She's developing as a striker. But she is aggressive. She's going to throw strikes. She's going to come forward. She definitely has her success in the pocket. She's not a big girl, at least in terms of like length or anything like that. She's only like 5'1" with like a 61 or 62-inch reach, but she's very physically strong. She's pretty good when she's able to get to those body lock positions and land her trips, throws, all of that stuff. And she's obviously shown to be completely fine on the ground and, finish some girls back regionally. Even, in the UFC, she's obviously had some struggles in terms of getting these girls out of there. But nonetheless, she's consistent to shoot. She's consistent to land her takedowns. Maybe not at the greatest accuracy because she's shooting so many of them, she's able to get them. She's obviously, very strong from top positions in being able to, rack up minutes. I think just generally her optics are good. Like in like this level of WMA to like the lower to mid tier, a girl who's going to go forward, throw a lot of strikes, make noise, be aggressive, shoot takedowns, black belt in both judo and jiu-jitsu. It's really all you want to see. I do think you're definitely going to get a bump back spot for Ricci probably in the near future, where she might get pushed up the ladder a little bit too much. But I guess just to touch on Penne real quick, she's bigger and she's longer, but she doesn't use her like length with any sort of the efficacy. She gets hit pretty consistently. Her takedown defense is poor. She's fine to play, from her back. So I think Ricci should be able to land takedowns here. I think Penne's fine to play in that realm. At the same time, I think both girls are competent enough, submission grapplers to Ricci not finish, and also Ricci not, get caught in some like meme, guard sub too. And that's kind of the thing with Penne too. Like she's fought a couple small girls in Ducote and Daniel Taylor too, and both of them had, very consistent striking success. I would say obviously Ducote is a more polished striker than Tabatha Ricci, but point being is that we have seen smaller girls go out there and land on her with impunity in the past. So I do think it's a good spot for Ricci. However, if there is a scenario where Ricci is threatened with the guard of Penne and they decide to stand and strike for the better part of 15 minutes, would I feel great with a Ricci minus 200 ticket? Probably not, right? So that's kind of where it's interesting. I think if you got in kind of on some of those earlier numbers around like the 160, 170-ish, that was probably a bit better. But yeah, there's still just some wonkiness that's in the back of my mind, and I'm obviously a little bit biased too. But I think from like a minute winning perspective, I do like Ricci in this fight.
That's funny. I thought your hat said Team Rico. I was like, who the fuck is Rico? That's funny. It says Ricci. I mean, like, listen, it's one of those things where Ricci's still kind of green. Like I said, she's still working her game out, but I think she can probably get by this one, just being a little bit more youthful, being a little bit more vigorous, having a bit more of a commanding presence when it comes to the judges' scorecards. So give me Tabatha Ricci here. But let's see. I'm curious to see if she covers this price tag. Now, next up in the lightweight division, we got a matchup between Joaquim Silva. He's 11-3, taking on Jesse Ronson, who is 21-11. And currently, got it. Joaquim Silva, minus 135. The comeback on Jesse Ronson is plus 115. So I know that my boy Joaquim Silva's had a rough run as of late. Was having a competitive fight with Nasrat, got caught with that big overhand left, and then in the Rick Glenn fight, man, tried to close the distance on the much taller guy, threw a big looping hook and got countered right down the middle. So props to both those guys for catching him. Now this fight here is interesting because Jesse Ronson officially has never won a UFC fight, but between you and me, he did beat Nicholas Dalby. But the thing about that Nicholas Dalby fight was that it was at 170 pounds. I felt like he looked significantly better at 70s than he did at 55, but not that he looked like a world beater at 70s. Let's not exaggerate. Just more so, those extra 15 pounds do probably take a lot out of him. I did see him look a little bit slower in the Rafa Garcia fight, but to break down Jesse Ronson's game, I just think that he's kind of, like a slick southpaw, kind of throws down the pipe a little bit, which Neto BJJ, Joaquim Silva likes to throw big looping hooks, and usually straight down the pipe beats those looping hooks. It's just that if Jesse Ronson is kind of slowing down a bit, I'm not sure how efficient he's going to be with those straight punches. And more often than not, when you just compare their overall UFC careers, I do think that Joaquim, despite being, a little bit on the slower side, a little bit on the sloppier side, I think that he's been decently effective. His takedown defense, his get-up game, he's got good power. And don't sleep on his grappling either. I mean, the guy, I know he loves to bang. He's got kind of that, what's the name of that dude that had that black belt in jiu-jitsu but used to bang every single fight and never uses jiu-jitsu? George Gorgel, maybe?
Okay.
Yeah. He's got a little bit of that George Gorgel thing going where, like, Joaquim Silva loves to bang, but the dude can grapple. I mean, he was just in a grappling competition with Neil Magny, who towers over him, who's way bigger than him, and Joaquim submitted him within like 2 minutes with a guillotine choke, man. And you saw that knee bar he attempted on Jared Gordon, man. I mean, that shit fucked up Jared Gordon for a couple years. He had him injured. He ended up knocking him out, but Jared Gordon was so tough that he didn't tap out, but lesser men would have tapped out. I think Jesse Ronson would have tapped out in that spot. So it's just about, Joaquim Silva's gotten out his comfort zone. He comes from the same camp as my boy Masuranduba Trinaldo, the Evoluciao Thai under Master Andre Dida. So under Master Dida's, with his blessing, now Joaquim Silva is actually in Florida at ATT. And I think he's got a great sparring partner for this fight in Natan Schulte, who's also kind of one of these guys who is just going to get in your face, who's got nonstop output. I think that's a really good look for Ronson. I think that's a better Ronson. I think it's a more aggressive Ronson. Maybe not as clean as Ronson, but I think faster, more youthful. And just I think that's the right look. I think he's got the right environment. So as long as his chin's not completely shot, I do see Joaquim Silva most likely getting it done. I'm considering a bet, but I'd like to get closer to pick'em, because if you're giving me pick'em odds on Jesse Ronson to lose a UFC fight, then I'm taking it.
Yeah, dude, I don't really have a strong opinion on this one. I think there's arguments to be made for both sides. A lot of it, honestly, is kind of narrative based for me, which is usually not my MO. But obviously, we had Ronson get popped off that. Or pop for steroids. And, this is his second fight back down at 155. He goes and makes that 155 like re-debut against Garcia. And I mean, that was the worst that Jesse Ronson's ever looked in his whole career. And I had a ticket on Ronson there, and I'm not really sure what the deal was. He just looked slow. He looked plodding. He didn't look prototypical Jesse Ronson, in my opinion. So figuring out where Jesse Ronson is at right now is kind of a little difficult. Similar with Silva, though. I mean, he just got viciously knocked out in his last two fights. Hasn't been the most active party in the world. And, historically with how Ronson is struggling, though, it's kind of more of with your grinding-based game plans, at least in recent years. And the thing with Silva is, despite, his jiu-jitsu background, he just doesn't really pursue a ton of wrestling. So I think it's probably a fun fight standing, assuming both guys let their hands go. Both obviously have shown power components, both with some questionable durability. I guess I'm kind of more on the plus money side of Ronson, but I think probably a better bet for the fight, I think, is looking towards violence on unders. But yeah, dude, I actually have to jump on a meeting here in 4 minutes. I apologize. It kind of came up last minute. Thought my schedule was cleared, but unfortunately not. So I'm going to have to jump off, but I really appreciate you having me on, bro.
It was my pleasure. Real quick, Jotko or Alan?
Jotko.
All right, man. You take care. I'll see you soon. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, boss. Peace.
See ya. Hey, Uncle Weezy, if you're in here, man, click this link I just shared in the chat and come on here and talk the rest of the card with me. Now, next up in the middleweight division, we got a matchup between Brendan Allen. He's 19-5, taking on Kris Jotko, who's 24-5. Currently, they got it. Wow. So they got it. Kris Jotko -115 and Brendan Allen is -105. So basically a pick 'em with a slight lean towards Jotko. It's a very interesting fight. Very, very, very interesting fight. Because Kris Jotko has kind of been the more consistent guy in terms of, like, if it's a close split decision type fight, he's very good at winning those close decisions. But when it comes more to the damage and the finishing fights, I think that Brendan Allen's got the edge there. The last time Kris Jotko finished a fight, off the top of my head, I actually bet him. when he was plus 200 against Tamden McCrory. So Tamden McCrory, the barn cat, this is a long ass time ago. I think it's the last time that Chris Jotko finished a fight. So, I mean, again, this is MMA, this 4-ounce glove. So I'm not saying he can't come out here and finish a fight. And Brendan Allen has been finished twice in the UFC, no doubt about it. It's just more so that the finishing threat often isn't there with Chris Jotko. The threat that's there is he's very, very good at winning these decisions. And that's the big concern here, man. So with Brendan Allen, I think he's an extremely talented kid. It's just sometimes the decision making isn't quite where you want it to be. You know, he's just a kid. He was born in 1995, and he's one of these guys that originally it was a case where like I needed him to become a black belt for his style to truly work. And now he became a black belt, and you've seen some flashes here. You know, he submitted Kevin Holland. He's beat a bunch of, you know, some decent guys along the way. But now it's not even about being a black belt anymore, because now he's swimming with the sharks. Now it's like I need the maturity to catch up, right? And once the maturity does catch up, I think that this kid is good everywhere, man. I think that he's got power on the feet. Obviously, you know about his ground game a long time. It's just that from time to time, he can be put on his back. You know, he can be outstruck. He can be chinned. So Allen's a wild card, but I think he's more talented than Jotko. It's just, can I trust Allen? That's the big question. And with Jotko, you know, he's got the fancy footwork. He's very good at, you know, doing just enough, just slightly outpointing you on the feet. And then you get kind of desperate. You want to charge him. You know, he'll change levels. He'll take you down at the end of the round and steal it on the judges' scorecard. So he's been very, very good at winning these close decisions. So I don't know. This is a tough one for me to call. I think this is one of the toughest ones for me to call on the entire card. And I see a lot of sharp opinion on Jotko, and I do understand why, because, you know, Brendan Allen, that last fight, you know, he was like a -3 something favorite. And that fight against Malkoun came down to the wire. Now, I definitely thought that Brendan Allen won that fight, but I also definitely thought that Brendan Allen didn't really cover his price tag in that fight. So I think there might be a little bit of recency bias because of that performance, where you kind of expected a little more from Allen and he kind of underperformed. But I think that is a different matchup. You know, I think that Malkoun, despite, you know, he doesn't have the name that Jotko has, but I think he's one of those guys that, you know, will attempt 14 takedowns in the fight. Jotko isn't really that guy. Jotko's just kind of like a straightforward meat and potatoes Euro point fighter. What's up, my boy? What's up, Uncle Weezy?
Yo, what's happening, man? How's it going?
It's going excellent. Yourself?
I'm doing good, dude. Doing good. Just taking care of some stuff around the house. Popped on the computer, saw you were rolling with Luke there, and I'm like, I'm going to sit back and watch for a while. So, yeah, I get to sit back and watch now too, man, now that I'm talking to you. How's it going?
It's going great. So, basically what I was saying about Allen is I think Allen's the more talented guy, but Allen, just because he's talented doesn't mean that he actually performs how you want him to perform. I think that sometimes the decision-making is questionable, and in that last fight, he was a -3 something favorite. And even though I thought he definitely won the fight, I thought that it came down to the wire. I thought it was super close. I thought he definitely didn't cover that price tag. But on the flip side, while Jacob Malkoun doesn't have the name that Jotko has, I don't think they fight anything alike. So I think it's a completely different matchup. You know, I think that Malkoun's a guy that'll attempt 14 takedowns, whereas Jotko's more of a Euro point fighter, kind of frustrate you on the feet, slightly be ahead of you, and then when you're not expecting it, land that last minute takedown and kind of seal it on the scorecard. So I can kind of see it going either way. I'm going to lean towards Allen, actually, because I do think he's the more talented guy here, but I can totally see Allen losing a close split decision. And Jotko just fought a similar matchup last time in Gerald Meerschaert, who is kind of more the OG version of Brendan Allen, right? So he kind of knows the blueprint, but Allen's the younger, more vigorous, more youthful version of Meerschaert. I mean, the kid was born in 1995, Uncle Weezy. Like, he's just a kid. I wouldn't know what it means to be born in the 90s. You understand what I'm saying? So
I'm with you.
It's one of those things. I think one day Allen's going to finally put it all together. It's just I've been saying that for like the last half decade. So maybe it's this Saturday. I'm a slightly lean Allen, but I don't know. I don't know, man.
Yeah, it's tough with Brendan Allen because he's still only 26 years old. And, you know, we've been remembering this guy fighting not only in the UFC, but this guy was fighting Anthony Hernandez, Trevin Giles on the regional scene, you know, before he even got here. You know, one of his first UFC fights was Kyle Dawkins. So he's had a really tough run of competition. He's fought a lot of good guys, and he's 8-2 up here. You know, he's doing really well, but man, he's making some bad decisions in the cage, some really bad decisions. And when you do that against a guy like Krzysztof Jotko, who is the perfect minute winner, when you talk about a guy who goes out there to win minutes and not win moments, it's Jotko. You know, the guy goes out there, he keeps range, he uses those kicks to kind of hit you when you can't hit him. He'll dance, he'll put you up against the cage when he thinks you're the better striker. He'll take you down if he thinks that you're the better striker. He'll keep you on the feet if he thinks you're a better grappler than him. He's always thinking. He's making good decisions in the cage. And when we see Brendan losing, we see him making bad decisions. What did he do against Strickland? He stood right in front of him and let Strickland just box his face off. Didn't try to take him down once. Didn't try to put him up against the cage. He stood in front of him while the information was downloading that he wasn't going to win minutes or moments on the feet against Strickland. So my problem with Brendan here is that he's fighting a guy that knows how to win fights, knows how to win minutes, and makes really good decisions, which means, man, you know, how do you really bet Brendan Allen when you know that Jotko is going to keep range, when you know that Jotko is not going to let Brendan Allen take him down? It's a tough spot, you know. Allen's going to keep getting better, and I think this is a very important fight for Brendan Allen because he's going to learn how to point fight here. You know, he's going to learn. Yes, what's up, Luke? What's up, dude? He found you a replacement, dude. I mean, like, you were gone 10 seconds, and I'm like, I'm jumping in there, man.
I can dip back out since you came in, Wheezy, if you want me to. They just moved it back another hour. I'm sorry, it's been a fiasco.
You're good. You're staying here. There's 3 of us now.
Yeah, man, let's do it. But yeah, that's the reason I'm picking Jotko for this fight is because he always makes good decisions, because he knows how to win minutes, because he's probably going to do what Brendan doesn't want him to do, and Brendan probably won't be able to make adjustments mid-fight to kind of counteract what Jotko's doing well. So I'm picking Jotko by decision.
All right, Luke, let's hear it.
Yeah, I'm on the Jotko side as well. I think it's probably a reasonably competitive fight, but I came down on the Jotko side for probably 2 primary reasons. I think that Jotko is one of the best defensive strikers that Allen has fought. Obviously, you know, Allen brings that volume component. We've definitely seen improved striking from Brendan Allen, but I don't think he's going to be able to get off on the historic volume that he has been able to in the past against a guy like Jotko, who's going to kind of skate the outside, point fight, really good check hook, good kick. He kind of fights in just like a really frustrating way, kind of similar to like a Caitlin Chukagian, maybe minus the high volume component and noises, but he makes guys fight his fight, I guess is the best way I would describe it. So I think Brendan might have a little bit of struggles there, but I do think the stand-up's going to be competitive. But I do think a part of the difference maker too is some of the wrestling that Jotko might be able to mix in here. Allen's takedown defense isn't very good, and I still think he's still primarily more of a bottom player transitional jiu-jitsu type of guy, more so than, you know, a really strong wrestler, get on top, pass your guard, mount, pepper shots, back take, rear naked choke. I'm not discounting his grappling ability. I'm just saying in terms of like how his fights are getting there. Like even in his fights with like Kevin Holland, there was lots of transitions. Even in his fights with Dawkins, there were some transitions where he got stuck on his back. We obviously saw him just get washed on the ground I wouldn't say washed, because he actually was able to get on top at points in that fight as well too. But I guess that's my point. I just don't think he's a very strong offensive wrestler. I don't think he's a very strong defensive wrestler. And we saw, Jotko be completely fine in the guard of GM3, who we know is the most dangerous submission grappler, at least historically in the middleweight division, I think with like nine or whatever subs or something like that right now. So I think he can be positionally responsible to not get caught. So I don't have like a super strong opinion on Jotko, but I think it's an okay fight for him with the correct game plan.
Now, next up in the light heavyweight division, we got a matchup between Maxim Grishin, he's 32-9, taking on Philipe Lynch, who is 15-5. And currently, they got it. Hold on one sec. So currently, they got it Maxim Grishin minus 175. The comeback on Philipe Lynch is plus 150. Interestingly enough, it actually opened up minus 110 apiece. All the action came on Maxim. I think that Maxim has looked, more impressive in the UFC. But Philipe Lynch was a guy that we kind of had high hopes for with his PFL run. The guy went out there, won the $1 million. There is that saying about, when you're sleeping with the silk sheets about, maybe not running the extra miles, maybe not waking up as early, this and that, but got his feet wet, got those first 2 fights under his belt. And I thought he looked at least a step in the right direction in that Marcin Prachnio fight, at least somewhat of the version of the guy we saw in the PFL, even if it was 205 and PFL was heavyweight, different weight class, I'm aware. Maxim's a guy who's a former heavyweight as well. Maxim actually beat Volkov back in the day on his regional scene, which is kind of crazy, man. And I am very grateful to Maxim for cashing that money for me against William Knight, but I think there's a different matchup here. My only issue with Maxim from time to time is occasionally he just won't do enough, but hopefully that's not an issue here, because if it's not, I think he's the cleaner guy. But, I do think Lynch is a powerful guy. I do think he's got a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I thought last fight was a big step in the right direction, and Vegas said pick him. So I'm curious to see how it plays out, but I'm going to actually agree with the public on this one. And Weezy, I'm going to go with Maxim Grishin to edge this one out.
Yeah, I'm on the Grishin side here too. The fact that this guy went 15 minutes with Dustin Jacoby and kicked the shit out of him in the first round. I mean, probably almost 10-8 at him. He dropped him twice. I just don't see Philipe Lins being a kickboxer of that caliber here. When I watched that Prachnio fight, I saw a dude who was just winging. I mean, he was just planting his feet and just winging. And Prachnio is not the kind of guy who's going to take you down. He's just a kickboxer. Grishin will mix in the takedowns every once in a while. He's a very well-rounded mixed martial artist. His grappling is actually quite underrated, in my opinion. And I think he'll be the bigger guy here, and I think he's going to be the more powerful striker. This guy, he's got really heavy hands. Lins was really trying to knock Prachnio out, and we've seen Prachnio get slept in the first round 3 different times in the UFC. One of them by Smiling Sam Alvey. This is the last guy that Alvey knocked out, and Lins was trying his best to get this guy on skates, and he just couldn't do it. I think Grishin's going to go through this guy like a hot knife through butter. I think he's going to shave his ass, and that was the pick for this week. I think Grishin's going to really kill this guy.
Luke?
Yeah, I guess complete the trifecta. It's not like a super passionate take for me, but just like stylistically looking back at the guys that Lins has struggled with historically, kind of Arlovsky, Bozer, 2 outside kickboxer archetypes, which pretty much falls into the blueprint of exactly what Maxim Grishin is, with obviously with what Weezy touched on too, with, some offensive wrestling upside of his own. But to your point too, Dan, the concern with Grishin is sometimes he can be a little bit tepid, a little bit more low volume, but I still think he plays in that game better enough, not a direct comparison, but even kind of touching back on the Jotko and Allen fight, where I think he's just better from a technical capacity in that way, where I don't necessarily think it matters. At the same time, where it's not like the Allen fight, Philipe Lins tends to actually be very patient, at least from the outside. It's usually when he's able to go forward and mix it up in the pocket is when he's able to have his most success. I don't see as much of that there. My primary concern for Grishin more than anything is probably the clinch. We have seen Grishin get stuck against the fence in a handful of outings. We saw a little bit of that from Lins in the last outing against Prachnio as well. He has a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but he did struggle to flatten Prachnio in that fight or really gain any dominant positions. And back to Weezy's point too, I think Grishin's a pretty big 205. And I thought that fight he had with Dustin Jacoby was really impressive, man. I know Jacoby has fought down at 185, but a guy, even if you reimagine his stats in his second UFC run, the guy's landing damn near 7 significant strikes per minute. And, he was able to drop that on average to about 4, right? Who's very high output, who's a very solid outside kickboxer, who's very quick too. So I think that does tell you something about Grishin's defensive capabilities as well. Obviously significantly hurt Jacoby too. So I think it's a decent spot for Grishin.
Now next up we got in Is this an 140-pound catchweight bout as well? Yeah. What it says. We got Julija Stolierenko. She's 10-6, taking on Chelsea Chandler, who's 4-1, guys. And currently they got it. It's about a pick 'em here. You know, Julija Stolierenko, she's -115. Chelsea Chandler -105. So pick 'em with a slight lean on Julija. And I get why. I mean, oftentimes Julija is most likely armbar or bust. But I think that she's also been fighting significantly better competition to where in those spots it has to be armbar or bust. Whereas here, I think that there might be some more paths. I think she might be able to get some top control, maybe even, land the better strike standing. Chelsea, I don't think she's bad. I just think she's a little too green for this moment right here. I think she might maybe need a little bit more seasoning on that regional scene. But I don't like laying chalk on either of these chicks, so I'm passing altogether, but my pick is Julija, Wheezy.
Yeah, my pick's Julija, too. I actually bet her last night to win by submission at +300 for a half unit. Chandler's a good little prospect, I think, though. She's fought a bunch of girls that have good records in Invicta. All 5 of her fights are in Invicta. But if you look a little bit deeper at these girls that she fought, none of them have won since she beat them. So it looks like she's fighting these 2-0, 3-0, 4-0, 4-2 fighters, but none of them won since Chandler beat them. So if you dig a little bit deeper into the strength of schedule of Chandler, it's not as good as it looks right away when you look at the records of the ladies that she beat when she fought them. So Stolierenko looked really good against Jessica Rose Clark. Fantastic. Got an open mat takedown right in the middle of the cage. Transitioned to the top and got that armbar almost immediately. And even again in the Alexis Davis fight, she had Alexis Davis, I think, in a spot where most of the women in the division would have tapped to that armbar that she had Alexis in. She's just a really aggressive grappler. And I also like the fight doesn't go to decision for this fight. Chandler's got seriously heavy hands, and she's knocking ladies down on the regional scene over and over again. She's very aggressive. She comes forward. There's power in both hands, and she likes to grapple as well. So I think this fight gets to the grappling, and I think if it does, Julija is extremely dangerous there. And if it stays on the feet, I think Chandler is going to have a lot of success with her pressure and with her power. I love violence in this fight. I did bet that Stolierenko by sub at +300 for a half unit, and I think Stolierenko gets the job done here.
Luke?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to be the dissenting one of the two. I'm going to go on the other side with Chandler. Definitely not a strong opinion. I think of the fight being line to pick is pretty fair. I think a slight lean to either girl, depending on your opinion, I think is also fair. I'm a bit biased though, because I've been talking to Chandler for like the last three to 4 years. And
what do you mean by that? What do you mean you've been talking to her?
Not like that. Not like that, Dan. Let's chill out a little bit. No, I've said for a while, I was like, we're going to see this girl in the UFC. I thought she had some potential early on out of that Nick Diaz Academy, Cesar Gracie purple belt. But I mean, yeah, you guys brought up a lot of valid points, right? Like obviously the strength of competition goes to Julija. She's, even fought them competitively in some capacity, right? I think she took the second off of Davis. I think she took the second off of Vila. She put Davis in that arm bar like you touched on. Problem with Julija is often she kind of accepts pressure first that comes back her way, and then she'll just return fire. And where Chelsea is just go forward all the time, I think that's been a pretty consistent archetype to give Julija problems standing. Her optics tend to be poor. She bleeds a lot. Yeah. But like I said, she's a tough, scrappy girl. I think she's probably a bit quicker. She might be the more durable party here, actually, as we've seen Chandler get hurt a lot. But she's hurt a lot of girls, to your point, too, Easy, that big straight left. Yeah. But where I disagree with you, I do think Chandler's grappling is actually good enough to not get armbarred here. Especially because I think she's probably going to be the one more likely to be on top. And I think she's probably able to pass the guard in this spot. At the same time, a few of the times you've seen her on bottom, it's been a little wishy-washy, but I've seen her Kimura sweep girls. Like she's competent on the ground, man. I think it's a high variable fight. I think there's just a couple different stances you can take for it. But the last thing I'll say is I do think Chandler is a featherweight through and through, and Julija is a bantamweight through and through. I think there's physicality advantages for Chandler. There's volume advantages for Chandler. There's clinch advantages for Chandler, but I think Julija is quicker, faster, probably a bit more durable, maybe a bit more dangerous as a grappler. Probably a bit more proven cardio, better strength of comp. So you can kind of match the X's and O's a lot of ways. But I'm going to go with Chandler.
Last but not least, kicking off the night, we got a bantamweight scrap between Randy Costa, he's 6-3, taking on Guido Canetti, representing Argentina, who is 9-6. And currently they got it Randy Costa minus 300. The comeback on Guido Canetti is plus 240. And another line, the under 1.5 is minus 170, and the over is plus 140. So a little interesting. Minus 170 to go under 1.5. I mean, all of Randy Costa's wins have come in the first round. All of Randy Costa's losses have come outside the first round, specifically in the second round. And Luke, I believe you made a tweet about the age gap. Was it 12 years or 14 years?
14.
And 14 years equals 67% chance for the younger guy to win. Correct?
Correct.
So there's that. And then I commented to be a little smart ass on the 3-fight sample size, but there's 100% chance that Costa loses anytime a fight goes past the first round. But, I mean, here's my thing. I think we all can see the potential of these two just, going head-to-head and someone getting finished in the first round. My hesitancy with that is that Costa just got broken twice in a row, and I'm curious to see if he's a little bit gun-shy. I'm curious to see if we still see that same front runner or if he's trying to ease into fights now. Because I don't think that Costa has a cardio issue. I mean, you look at the kind of shape the guy's in, he's not skipping his runs. I think that Costa has bully syndrome, which he comes out here, tries to overwhelm you, and he tries to get you out in the first round. But if you can't do that, he mentally breaks. And it looks like it's a cardio issue, but it's not. I mean, when you're in the kind of shape that Randy's in, I promise you this guy's running miles and doing all the strength and conditioning. He is in very, very good shape. He's just what we like to refer to as a front runner. He's a bully. I mean, and if you stand up to the bully's going to get tired. That's just how it goes. The thing is that my boy Guido Canetti is over 40 years old. He's been stopped before more than once. I mean, not just in the UFC, even on The Ultimate Fighter. I know y'all remember Alejandro Turbo Perez's brutal knockout on there. So Randy could possibly front run in this fight and get a head kick knockout or something like that. But Guido, for a guy who I thought was completely done at one point, I was surprised he went to a split decision with Mana Martinez. I think Mana Martinez has some very underrated power in that division, and Guido ate his shots. I know he got rocked a couple of times, but he ate his shots, even won a round in that fight. And then that last fight against the punching bag, he treated him like a punching bag. So I was happy to see it for Guido. So I'm curious to see if Guido can extend this somehow. I mean, historically, Guido is also a guy who likes to finish fights early, but I've actually seen him go out there and win decisions. But then on the other hand, Randy's 14 years younger. He's much more physically imposing. I'm going to lean Randy. It's just I can't lay no -3 something on Randy Costa. I just can't. I don't trust the guy at all. I think he's a front runner. But I think that he's a dangerous front runner and therefore might get a head kick knockout or something. But I kind of hope that this fight is greasy and, is close. And I want to see Guido have some moments, just not convinced he does. Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, man, I think you broke down the fight pretty well. Costa hasn't won a fight past 2 minutes and he's -300. That's just kind of just the automatic, if you've been in this game long enough, kind of red flag right off the top. I mean, I think one of my favorite bets I've cashed within the last couple of years was on Tony Kelly at +175 against Costa.
Oh,
I was wondering what I thought that was.
His dog's barking. That means Guido's live. Oh, I hear that.
He likes Guido here, man. I don't know if he's from Argentina or what, but that's my dog. Let me check on that. You guys keep talking.
All right. Yeah, but no, I think you bring up a lot of good points, man. I do want to at least touch on the Martinez quick fight, though, for Kennedy. I think a decent bulk of that was because Martinez did absolutely nothing through like the first 7.5 minutes of the fight. And it was really when Martinez decided to do things. That's when he started to, start landing more shots. That's when he started to, hurt Kennedy. But if you remember the first round, Kennedy just like circled the outside and kicked him, and Martinez just kind of like looked at him for the first round. So I think that was part of it. But I do agree, Manny Martinez has power. I just think kind of the dynamic, I just thought he fought him kind of like a dummy, which is why it was closer than it should have been. But stylistically, historically, Kennedy does struggle with general pressure. And I do think that's something that Costa's going to bring. Obviously, the more youthful party, more explosive. We've seen Kennedy's durability come into question. But, yeah, I mean, you're still kind of in no man's land with Randy Costa in a fight out of the first round, right? Like, I mean, what does it look like? I have no idea. Honestly, I think what the best path to victory for Kennedy would be is to come out here and wrestle. Like he's shown the ability to do it a little bit in the past. It's been a component of him winning some of his fights within the UFC. Obviously, Costa's been submitted in both of his losses, but more so out of failed TDAs from himself after he gets exhausted, and then guys, take his backer or finish him that way. But I think just Kennedy not doing the dance around the outside circle thing, you need to make Costa work, right? It's an established cookie cutter blueprint, at this point, or at least just take the ass whooping, survive. He gasses himself trying to finish you, right? But I think it would be good to kind of take a similar approach even to what Kelly did. Obviously, Kelly, that fight was more clinch heavy than like wrestle heavy, but it was that clinch attritional work that really broke Costa down. So I think if Kennedy comes out here, puts on a singlet, shoots some takedowns, tries to sap that gas tank of Randy Costa, there could be some merit. He could go out there and bonk Randy Costa too, right? Kennedy throws everything in every one of his kicks. Like everything is just 100% power for Guido Kennedy. Not a historic, pace machine per se, but everything he throws is hard. Shit, he had Marlon Chito Vera in some deep shit, in the first round of their fight, if you remember that. But at the same time, we're dealing with one of the oldest fighters on the roster in Kennedy. And me talking about the wrestling, the guy hasn't wrestled in his last 3 fights. Can you anticipate him to do that? What percentage does he bonk? Does he even do enough to win a decision or sap the gas tank of Costa? I don't know. But I mean, a Kennedy live bet I think is interesting. Maybe a must play at this point after one potentially if he survives.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that things need to be perfect when you're talking about like a plus 285 dog. Like, just get it done by any means, Guido, if you're taking that shot. But Weezy, I mean, where do you kind of see Randy Costa's confidence after it's not just that he took 2 L's, it's that he got broken in both those L's. He took a knee against Adrian Yanez. He covered up and wanted no more against Tony Kelly. Where do you think he's at mentally? Do you think he feels like he belongs in the UFC?
I don't think he does. I don't know. I mean, personally, I've seen a guy with so many holes in his game. The thought of laying minus 300 on Randy Costa makes me want to puke. I mean, it really does. Luke said it absolutely perfectly. If you want to be a long-term winner in this game, you cannot bet on fighters like Randy Costa. You know how many minutes of cage time Randy Costa had coming into the UFC in 4 fights? 2.47.
I was at his debut.
Yeah, dude, were you one of the guys holding that giant head? They had the cardboard cutouts of his head in the crowd, dude. And I mean, like, dude, it was fun watching Randy Costa tape. You can watch his entire career in 10 minutes, okay? and you can you watch those regional scene fights, and like literally everybody in the crowd is rooting for Randy Costa, and he is absolutely shaving these dudes' asses. In 10 seconds, in 12 seconds, in 18 seconds. But we've seen a couple guys do what you need to do against this guy, which is when somebody's a really good kicker like Costa, you walk forward, dude. You don't let that guy plant his feet. And that's what Tony Kelly did for the entire fight. That's what Adrian Yanez did in the second round. In the second round, Yanez started tubbling and tripling up his jab, and he was walking forward the entire time, and it broke Costa. It broke Costa when Tony Kelly started walking forward from the very first second. Tony Kelly didn't stand in front of Randy Costa for 1 second. And look what happened, man. So I think it's a pretty easy plan for Guido Canetti. I think he's got to walk forward. I think he's got to mix in the wrestling, like Luke said. He's 9 of 18 on his takedown attempts in the UFC, so the guy can actually wrestle a little bit if he wants to. And if he can weather that early storm, get past those first 150 seconds, because once a fight has went over 150 seconds, Randy Costa is 0-3. So, there's paths here for Guido Canetti. I would not lay this juice on Randy Costa. If you're going to bet him to win by first round knockout, or even bet the under 0.5, because that's how he wins. All 6 wins come in under 150 seconds. All 3 losses come over 150 seconds. Front-loaded bully, just like you said, Dan. And this is a good spot for Canetti to walk forward, mix in the wrestling, weather the early storm, and potentially get a win here. But I'm still picking Costa to win by first round knockout. But there's no way in hell I'm betting it.
Yeah, and on the topic, we talked about Mana Martinez. We talked about Randy Costa's debut against Brandon Davis. Mana Martinez and Brandon Davis are fighting, so it'll be interesting to see if Mana can get that first UFC knockout, because Davis, I like him, I respect him, but I think he's a lot better at 45s than he is at 35s. So I'm not sure if his chin can take a Mana Martinez punch. So I'm very interesting to see what the odds are on that. So, gentlemen, before I get you out of here, we got to talk about the fight to watch and the fighter to watch. All the fans, do us a huge favor. Smash the like button. Hit the subscribe. Again, apologies about my audio issues. I promised to have them sorted out for the next card, but I want to thank Luke and Uncle Weezy for joining me. So, Luke, what is the fight to watch for UFC Vegas 61?
Was that to me? Sorry.
Yes, sir.
The fight to watch has definitely got to be Davis Borchev. I think that's gonna be chaos. Well, potentially not chaos if Mike Davis goes out there and puts on his singlet. Maybe it is a boring fight, but something tells me that Davis might go out there and stand and bang. I think that's got to be your number one candidate for fight of the night.
Uncle Weezy, that fight to watch.
There's no doubt about it. It's Davis Borchev. I can't wait to see that fight. And, we don't get to see Mike Davis fight nearly enough. I don't know what's going on with this dude. Why is he not fighting? He hasn't fought since January of 2021. So I don't know if there's some, health issues going on here for Davis. But I get excited every time this guy walks into the cage. He's been in nothing but great fights. So I'm really looking forward to that fight. And I don't think Davis... I think Davis is a good wrestler at getting guys to the ground, but I don't think he's like a Khabib type where he gets a lot of control time and wins with top control and ground and pound. I think Borchev is going to get back up, and I think it's going to be an absolute banger. I can't wait for that one.
Yeah, for me, my fight to watch is Barcelos versus Trevin Jones, man. I mean, I think that Barcelos, people were calling this guy WEC Aldo just a few fights ago. People were saying that this guy's going to fight for a UFC title, and I love his output. I love his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He fights with a lot of spirit, and if there's one thing his opponent, Trevin Jones, can do, he can knock people the F out. So I'm very intrigued by that fight between Barcelos and Jones. Luke, who is the fighter to watch?
I'm gonna go all the way down. I'm gonna go with my girl Chelsea Chandler. I want to see how she does. In the UFC, and I think it's probably going to be a fun fight. And we're gonna see if she can maybe live up to the prospect that I think she might be. But she's definitely got her hands full with Julija. But I'm gonna be looking forward to my girl Chelsea's debut.
Uncle Weezy, who's the fighter to watch for UFC Vegas 61?
I'm going to say Mackenzie Dern. I saw a lot of things that I liked out of Mackenzie in the last fight. I've always said, when you have that kind of grappling pedigree, there's no reason to ever fall in love with your hands. Just walk forward, pressure, put that opponent on the back foot, corner off the cage, get their back up against the cage, shoot that double leg, get on top. But Mackenzie can pull guard. Mackenzie can try to take your back standing. She doesn't have to necessarily get the takedown. Her jiu-jitsu is so good. She can work from the bottom, roll for a leg lock, use that to sweep, get on top, and work for those submissions. I need to see Mackenzie Dern take that next step to continue to fight in the way that she's going to be able to use those gifts that she has, which is that black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, that amazing submission game. And she's got a great test here in Xiaonan Yan. And I really believe that if we see Dern walking forward, if we see Dern sell out to get that grappling, we're going to see the archetype of fighter that can win the championship in this division.
Wow. And for me, my fighter to watch is Randy Rude Boy Brown. Listen, this guy's minus 300 against Trinaldo. He's got quite the price tag to cover, but I've thought since day one that this kid is extremely talented. He's got a lot of potential. I personally think he's a top 15 guy right now, and winning this fight is going to further cement that claim. But winning this fight with style points is what's going to get him over that hump to that next level. And I just got to pay attention to see if he's going to do that, because Trinaldo's no walk in the park. The only guys that finish Trinaldo are legit fighters. And I want to see, like, is Randy Brown going to finally live up to this potential that I've been saying he's had since day one? This is a fight that's going to let me know that. So for that reason, Randy Rude Boy Brown is my fighter to watch. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on this special edition of Half the Battle. You can follow Luke at SWR_betting. You can follow Uncle Weezy. Uncle Weezy, what's your Twitter?
It's at MMA Weezy.
Okay, at MMA Weezy. You can follow me at Best Fight Picks. Subscribe to Half the Battle everywhere podcasts are found. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I promise I'm going to work out the audio issues for the next episode, but thank you all for sticking around. And until the next time, let's cash these bets.